Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy, I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you all doing? I took the last 2 weeks off for obvious reasons. Other things to spend my time doing. Number one, obviously, what are we calling it? The new civil rights movement? I don't know. Nam and I have been using our other show, Couples Therapy, to raise money for organizations like Reclaim the Block and the Ochre Project. Also, that podcast, we just went independent from our network, and so that was a lot of work. So that's what my last couple weeks have been. Oh, also not sleeping. Anyone else like that? You get a couple hours, then you wake up with anxiety, then you get a couple more, maybe. That's where I am. I just did a great interview today with Ben Passmore, who is a wonderful comics artist. You might know his work from The Nib, which is the leftist cartooning newsletter. But when I was talking to him, I'm like, oh, right, I'm exhausted. My brain is not working. But luckily for today's episode, my brain was working pretty well. I just talked to my guest last week, and, I have like a bunch of episodes banked, and I'm just going to put them out in whatever order feels right. Talking to today's guest, Thao Nguyen, feels pretty timely to put this talk out. A lot of interesting stuff. If you don't know who Thao is, let me read you her bio. Originally from Falls Church, Virginia, musician Thao Nguyen began playing music as a young teenager, but it was with the release of her first album, Like the Linen, in 2005 that her actual career began. Her next album, We Brave, Bee Stings and All, her first with the Get Down, Stay Down, was released on Kill Rock Stars to general acclaim. And since then, her albums, whether with the Get Down, Stay Down, or collaborations with musicians like Mira, like former guest of the show Mira, they are all fantastic and well worth your time. Her latest, Temple, was just released in May by Ribbon Music. Listen to it because it is very, very good. Yeah, it was interesting to talk to her because, both of us, feels weird to promote something now. And we talk a little bit about that and why I think at least good people should still be promoting things. Or people making good things like Thao does. Well, I guess that's all subjective. But I suppose what I mean is you can continue doing activism work and still make a living. You kind of have to. Someone who goes gig to gig, what am I going to do? Activism on an empty stomach? We talk a lot about Thao's childhood, her relationship with her mother, and how that kind of influenced her development as a person. And a lot of other things. Thao's a very thoughtful person, and I hope you enjoy this talk. By the way, if you do enjoy what you hear, you could subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Google Play and Stitcher and all those places. You can listen to other episodes. I think all of them are on Spotify, and all of them should be at beginnings.libsyn.com. I've done hundreds of interviews with incredible writers and performers and musicians and artists. So check those out. You can just go through the archive. I mean, I don't know, who have I talked to lately? Vagabond. That was great. Colin Newman from Wire. Mitski. I don't know, a bunch of great ones with musicians. And tons of other wonderful talks. I'm on social media at Andy Beckerman on both Instagram and Twitter, and I think that's about it. Stay tuned. I've got some amazing ones coming up. Mac McCon from Superchunk, Josh Radner from How I Met Your Mother, who else? Sam Precup from Sea and Cake, and a ton of other cool people. So stay tuned. But for now, let's talk to Thao. Beginnings. partly what this show is in some way, like figuring out how people's childhoods are the foundation of the things that they make, right? But also, I don't know. I mean, look, I've done the show for 10 years. I think there's anecdotal evidence that's fruitful for understanding things, but also it could just be bullshit. And and just like, oh no, yeah, no, my childhood, absolutely nothing in it affects how I make things today.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, if that's ever disputed, I'm totally screwed because I think I've placed a lot on the childhood.
In what way?
I do believe this. I think that a lot of feelings of loneliness and instances of trauma, all of that has definitely informed my creativity and my what I'm trying to understand or process or communicate through my music.
I mean, maybe we can talk a little bit about, where you grew up, the suburbs of DC in Northern Virginia. Whenever someone says that to me, I just assume that their parents are in some way in the quote unquote State Department or CIA or something like that, right? But I know that there's a lot of other professionals that live there. What was it? What part of what suburbs did you grow up in? Like, what was the name of the place? What was it like? What did your parents do? I know your parents came over from Vietnam in the 70s.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Falls Church, Virginia, which sometimes I say Falls Church, but it's Falls Church. It's about 8 miles outside of DC. And I grew up in probably what you would call like a lower middle class neighborhood. And it wasn't until I was in high school where I met kids whose parents worked in those fields that you were referencing, like for the CIA, for the State Department, on and on, and for the government, for the federal government. But the neighborhood I grew up in, the people I grew up with were, it was definitely working class. And my mom, for a while I think she worked in the mailroom for the, I think it was called the World Wildlife Federation, or I don't even know. That was when I was pretty young. But I remember there always being a lot of empty envelopes and letters that had to go into them, and then getting T-shirts with animals on them, which I can only imagine just some of the many perks that she had. And my dad was an electrician for the Metro line. So he worked on the Metro. Yeah. And then when I was 12, our family unit kind of disintegrated. But my mom, who had not been working for a while, basically had to get a bunch of loans together and then get money from family to figure out how to keep us afloat. And so she ended up with my uncle buying this little laundromat. So from when I was 12 on, I worked at this laundromat.
So, I mean, 12 years old, you're already you're not formed as a person yet, but you're, on your way there. So it wasn't like, there have been people I've talked to on the show, right, who like their parents split up, when they were like 3 or 4. And it just like, I didn't know whatever parent left, right? I just didn't know them. And it doesn't, but like that. So I have to imagine that is that's something you have to get over, right? It's not just like, it was right there front and center in your head, I'm guessing.
It was one of many things to grapple with. And I don't know if, I think if your parents split up, but if each parent is still in your life and makes an effort, or they figure out how to still parent, then them splitting up could be something that you adjust to and can, as long as they're both in your lives, in your life, then it's easier to get over it or move beyond it. But in my case, the relationship with my dad is such that that was never the case. He basically kind of abdicated his role. And he was shitty to start with. So I'm not saying, he's a kind of a very feckless, reckless person. So anyway, that stays with me still. It took me, God, I'm 36 now. I'm not this previous record, the one before, it was called A Man Alive. And it's all about me grappling with my relationship with my dad and my lack thereof, and all of the abuse, all of the trauma, all that shit that has taken me so long.
Yeah. It's something that, like, unless you do a lot of work, and even then, I think it changes you. I think it fundamentally changes you as a person to have a parent leave, regardless of whether they were a good or bad parent before. To rupture that relationship, the familial relationship like that is very fundamentally traumatic.
I agree. But if it happens, well, in my case, I can only speak to my case. I believe that it happened early enough so that I didn't understand that it was such a rupture and such a traumatic one and such a dramatic one, that basically it took me a really long time to understand that something had gone very wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And because there are a lot of things that can be attributed to that, that I just, if you just have to keep pushing forward, and if you don't acknowledge it, then the way you develop how you interact with the world is so informed by it, but it becomes so almost inherent that it takes a lot to backtrack and figure out all the mechanisms you developed and what serves you and what does not serve you.
Yeah, because it's also like, I just thought about this. It's at such an important time in a person's life when it's right when like you start like this, like, that kind of like, I don't know if you'd call it like a Freudian dialectic or whatever, but like you start pushing back against your parents, however you want to, like, whatever psychology term you want to use, right? But you start pushing back against them. I remember like I was kind of the person I am now in adulthood in my early days, and then around 12, 13, I start pushing against my parents, and that causes trying to figure out what my identity is, eventually to return back to who I was. But I don't know if you need your parents to push against or what, but like you're trying to find your identity then, and then to also be dealing with this kind of like these family issues at the same time. I think, like, I guess the question I'm curious about is like, how do you find out who you are as a person through that? Or how did you specifically?
Yeah, I laugh only because I think it's very recent, almost embarrassingly recent, that I believe that I have found out who I am. And I think a lot of that, that's interesting that you're talking about that time in your life where you push back, you sort of figure out what the boundaries are so that you can help define yourself. But I didn't have that experience. And this could also, I do believe that there are elements of the family I grew up in and the culture I grew up in where the individual self is not, the discovery of the individual is not prioritized. And the emphasis is you exist for the group and you exist for the family and you exist to honor your elders. And but so at that time, I would never, and I grew up watching my mom work so hard and absorb so many things. probably, and the least of which was my dad leaving, and so my goal in life has always been to never bring her any turmoil, cause no trouble, and that was, I know I became a musician, but that's always been what my priority was to honor her to whatever extent was necessary. So that's, I believe in that, and that's what I did. But I also, the other side of that is you tamp down and you cease to exist for yourself.
Yeah. When you say that, do you mean like you, like, I don't know how conscious this was, but did you like wall yourself off in some way? Did you just like subordinate yourself to like, well, my mom needs this, right? I don't want to, I know she's been through so much. I don't want to do anything else. And so consciously you're like, I'm just not going to like think about this, what I want or who I want to be in some way. And I'm just going to be there for her.
I had that, all that said, I did have this very deep desire to play music and to be a songwriter and to perform. So, thankfully, she was very supportive of that. I don't know what would have happened if she had taken more issue with it, but there was a lot of pain that you just. Well, I never wanted to show her that I was sad because I knew that my sadness would just make her so sad. But then there's, that's why the outlet of music and songwriting was so important. It was sort of the only way, and so many people, probably every musician will say the same, is that there's the only place where all of the things could go.
You would be surprised. There are some, I wonder if it's a generational thing, because I wonder if it's when I talk to people who are like maybe Gen X and older, if for them there are some people it's an intellectual exercise. It's really strange to see, again, a lot of this is anecdotal because I've never taken hard data on this show, but like, or creativity, but like people are just, Stephen Merritt sticks in my head. He's like, no. So, because I asked him, because he like grew up kind of in a cult, and like there was like a lot of heavy stuff he dealt with, and I'm like, oh, so are you working some of this stuff out in your music? He's like, no, it's just a puzzle. I'm like, wow, all right, he could be lying to himself and me. I don't know, right? But taking someone at their word, it's I have stopped guessing at why or how people make or the things they make.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I guess if you can work it out another way, great. Just wherever you can, however you can.
I mean, yeah, some people like, it's like, no, I did all that work in therapy, or I just don't, or it's just like stored inside me somewhere. Also, I live in Los Angeles. There are so many sociopaths that wander around that have learned how to mimic human behavior and emotions perfectly. So maybe they're just like great at mimicking, I don't know, a million minor birds.
Right.
Something I want to go back to when you were talking about like there being certain cultural things that you grew up with that where it's more about the collective than the individual. I was curious, is that Vietnamese culture period? Is that Vietnamese culture with kind of like communist philosophy that is, I was going to say wrapped around it, but I mean more that like flows through Vietnamese culture, or Vietnamese culture in the way that it was transmitted to you through your parents?
Well, I'll say I don't believe. Well, my family would. My family fled communism in the 70s because my mom worked for the South Vietnamese embassy, and my dad was a pilot in the South Vietnamese Air Force. So I don't think that they would attribute that to it. There are elements of like very, I would say elements of very old sort of Confucianism that go throughout the culture that are about the reverence for the elders, and but I can't speak a lot to that. I'll say that I know families who are Vietnamese who communicate a lot more than mine did, but the emphasis on kids. The emphasis on showing reverence and respect and obedience seemed to me very common, and the idea that I grew up in a very you'll speak when you're spoken to environment, so that, there's definitely old school elements.
Do you think that like constrained your not personal development, but like your identity? You're figuring out your identity. Do you think that constrained it in any way? It might be unanswerable.
I don't know if it constrained me figuring out. Well, actually, yeah, totally. I mean, my queer identity, I think I didn't go there for a long time, even though I went there I was able to divide my life in and that's what this most recent record is about. It's like finally existing in a space where I am every part of myself. And that part of myself, it was hard to acknowledge to my family, and it was hard to do the work wherein I could exist honestly with them. So, I mean, I moved across the country. I'm from Virginia. I moved the fuck across the country, and I didn't even realize what I was doing, but I was doing it to live my life. But at it was hard to acknowledge that, and so that element, I would say, in other ways, it only impeded my ability to communicate about myself.
But you had the self-knowledge.
I did. In all respects, I think I've spent a lot of time inside my head, and I don't. And talking about myself is sort of a later effort and evolution.
I mean, this also, to go back to another little thing, when you said you're like, I don't know what I would have done if my mom had pushed back against wanting to be a musician. I mean, it's a little bit of a counterfactual, but like, what was there any kind of rebelling, that as you got to be older, into your teens, did any of that take over? Because it's a leap of faith. If you don't come from money, it's a leap of faith to do any of this, right? It's not, it's one of we got into the latest stage of the new civil rights movement. Turned out to be like, we'll do civil rights for about a week, and now we're just going to like attack people on Twitter. And now they're like people who like went to Tisch and grew up in Westchester are getting attacked on Twitter. But also, it's kind of true, they just had everything handed to them a little bit. They walked out of NYU with a manager and an agent. None of this is promised. It wasn't promised to me. It wasn't promised to my wife. We didn't come from much. So, pretty working class or middle class backgrounds. All that being said, I'm just trying to like set up like it's a pretty big deal to be like, yeah, I'm going to go do this thing that is extremely risky. And it both like from a familial point of view and a, our culture point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And luckily I didn't assess how risky it was. I never really considered doing anything else, and I didn't consider how dangerous it was to do this. You know, well, I had my older brother saying I graduated college. I never rebelled. My sophomore year of college, I thought I wanted to leave school and pursue music without getting my degrees. And my mom immediately was like, no way, no, absolutely not. And as soon as, she's really patient. And as soon as she got, she has a certain tone that even now, if I heard it, I would just, I would stand back. And so as soon as, I just knew it wouldn't fly immediately. And so I finished school. And then the week after I graduated, I went on tour. That was my first full U.S. tour. And I remember my older brother saying, you can do this for 5 years, and if after 5 years you are not completely solvent, you're going to grad school. And he's old, he's 8 years older than me. So he's always kind of filled that role of that more, which I needed, that kind of more paternal role. Mm-hmm. And he was like, you're not going to sleep on mom's couch. You're not going to ask me for money. You better get your shit together, And luckily I was able to, or I don't know what happened, but when you're in your early 20s, you can do things, you can tolerate so much, and you can kind of exist on the fringe in so many ways.
Yeah.
If, you can be very punk rock about it and be fine,
Oh yeah. There's a certain delusion to it. If the path isn't laid out right in front of you, I know that if I had known anything of what I know about entertainment, I don't know if I would have tried it. I had to have that delusion in order to try it. I put my hand in front of my face. I wiped my hand in front of my face. As if it was a veil that was over but it kind of was.
Yeah. I'm just remembering now that the way that things started for me, the things that I encountered, unfortunately, I absorbed and didn't do anything about, and I'm still. It was such a different time. I know it was only 2006, 2007, 2008, but it was such a different landscape. And to push back against media or a label or a producer, whoever, to push back was required a strength that I didn't have, and it required a courage I didn't have then.
How do you think you got that? Just experience?
Well, if just this disgust accumulates, and at a certain point, you're done.
Yeah.
But I don't think if the climate had changed so much, and I say that for just recently with the Me Too movement or whatever, all of these things that are these the slowly moving levers that are more quickly moving.
Oh, I see.
And I'm talking about racism in the industry. I'm talking about sexism, of course. But I'm so grateful to the energy and the people who push us forward so that other people who didn't necessarily have the courage at the right time can, and those of us that are lucky enough to still be working, you sort of can catch that wave where you can.
Yeah, it's this is not to, there's the people who will be like, well, all you went through, you're so much stronger for it. It's like, no, I'd rather have not gone through any of that shit and just people let me make the music I want to make or whatever. We just talked about, my wife and I have a podcast together, and we just did an episode where we're like, all right, well, everyone's kind of like spilling the tea about their experiences. We sold a show in 2015 about race. My wife's black, so this makes sense. And she was going to be the host of this show. And it was just like hurdle after hurdle from like white executive after white producer that made it untenable to do this thing. And we finally had to like walk away, and it's just been this. It sucked because it was like a good idea. It was a fun idea, and there was something of substance at the core of it, so that it wasn't just like shit that we were throwing on TV for a paycheck. But all that stuff is fucking traumatizing, and I guess I can, it's not the most traumatizing thing in the world, but just having to. On a daily, I mean, literally, we walked away from it because she got an ulcer and I started getting chest pains from dealing with these people. Mm-hmm. And I don't know exactly what your experiences are, but I assume that it's on that spectrum. It's in the same realm as dealing with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's all in that incredibly disappointing realm.
Yeah, I mean, when you started, making music professionally, so we're talking about like the mid 2000s, right? Are there I tend on the show to dwell, because like I said, my brain catastrophizes. I tend to like look at the negative, but like what were the bright spots that were like encouraging you and pushing you along? Or the people that were doing that? Well,
what was awesome is the first label I was on was Kill Rock Stars, but I grew this is so funny. I'm such a dork. I come from more of like a songwriter realm. So I had never, and I only ever played music by myself. I didn't go out because I lived in the suburbs and my mom never wanted me to go out. So, it's not like I went into DC to catch a Fugazi show or something. I just was in my room. And so Kill Rock Stars came along, and Slim Moon, who started Kill Rock Stars, became my manager in 2006, 2007. And, there's this, then you have this label that has such an incredible roster, and they have very solid, righteous politics and in this history. But I didn't know any of this. But they were so supportive. They're great, and it was very fortunate to start out that way. And that's why I felt like I could keep going. I guess that's why I never questioned the beginnings or how I would make it happen, because it happened so gradually, but it happened within a supportive network, that I thought I could just make a record, go on tour. And, the things that I experienced were outside of that nest. That was like talking to music writers. That was going... is reading reviews where they're like, oh, she wrote it in a foxhole. That's like doing a press day in Europe where this Italian man is saying, but what he said a lot of things. We don't have to go into it. So no matter what, that time period, there was an incredible leniency and tolerance. Like I said, probably all of this could happen up until maybe a couple years ago. Last year, where you could get away with, like a white music writer could get away with so much about around reducing someone to what they perceived their essence was, or dismiss them on sight.
Yeah. No, personally, I'm sure I've witnessed, but definitely like seeing friends and loved ones. It's just easy to just like, oh, you're a woman? Okay. Well, I know what's up. I know what this deal is. You know, I don't have
or,
to.
Yeah.
I don't have to. You know, there's this like. I mean, I don't know if we want to just say like there's just assholes, or you know, obviously there's also like the kind of misogynistic and white supremacist structures that built our fucking society that also give rise or allow the assholes to be the assholes that they are, right? So, I mean, there's, you know, micro and macro features to this, but like that allow people, you know, they walk into an interaction and then just place a structure on you and then walk away without so that I don't know what the reason is, but my guess is like so they don't have to deal with people as an individual.
You know, it's been very interesting. I know everybody has taken time. I hope everyone has taken time to consider more of what's happening and how we all help perpetuate that structure or participate in it. People who are not Black participating in this white supremacist structure, and all I can do is consider, like, you know, being a part of the Asian American community and knowing how much anti-Black racism courses through and how no one addresses it, no one discusses it. And it's been really, the best I can do is just, I've been reading what other Asian Americans have to say about how we start to dismantle what we can within our own families, within our own culture. And, you know, just as you were saying, like, I have, it's kind of disgusting. You think back how you just have to consider how you have participated in it and let whatever fucking dude say whatever, you know, it's, or say thank you for this, whatever fraction of the thing that it is, and say thank you for even letting me be in this conversation. Thank you. Just this like blind gratitude.
Yeah.
For being considered, for someone saying maybe you are not foreign.
Oh, I see. I mean, I'm sure it has, but like, in what way, you know, dealing with these kind of people and these kind of pressures in the music industry, has it pushed you away from certain avenues or pushed you away from certain people or places where you want to go as an artist?
You know, that's a very interesting question, because I think for my own part, I need to know where I want to go as an artist. And I think that, you know, I'm 14, 15 years into all this, and I'm not quite sure the first few records I knew what I wanted to do, you know, and I started young enough so that I don't believe that I knew what I wanted my music to be at the time I started making records, you know, and fortunately I've been able to continue my career trying to figure that out. And so I can't say that anyone has stopped me from musical inclinations. But I think I need to create more space to understand what it is I want to do.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder also, like, how, like, those kind of, like, whatever. I'm just using whatever that Italian guy said as an example, but like him putting like here's my impression of you, or whoever doing that. Like, now you have to react to that person, right? And it kind of like, at least in my mind, it cuts off your ability to make that decision, make that existential decision for yourself, because now you're reacting to someone else's impression.
Definitely.
As opposed to,
Yeah, and I think, I was busy trying to make him feel comfortable for some reason. You're busy saying thank you when you have kind of whatever shutdown mechanisms, whatever you have to do to proceed. Those tools get in the way of a different kind of self-exploration, a different kind of creativity and discovery. And then you have that shame of having taken it, have just internalized it and absorbed it and just been like, it's a lifetime of not, for me, it's been a lot of instances where I didn't say what I needed to say, and I didn't assert myself, and I didn't stand up for myself. I didn't defend myself in the ways that I wish I had. But I can also understand all of those scenarios are really uncomfortable and definitely unsafe. Like I'm on, years ago I was on stage and I stopped wearing dresses, actually. I was on stage and these guys, during the show, everyone has, I would imagine that performers have moments like this a lot, or have had, where they're in the front row and they just have their phones and they're basically holding them under my dress while I'm singing and playing. But in those moments, you're like, in that moment, I should have stopped the show, but I didn't. I just kept going. So anyway, all that stuff, the wear and tear of those moments.
Yeah.
And that's when you look to people and you find inspiration and strength from people who won't put up with it, have never put up with it, are fucking done putting up with it.
Yeah, like Jesus. Like, look, I mean, what in that moment, like, I can't even imagine that. I can imagine like the 1%, the sliver, the slight version of that, of like being a performer. Like, I get being a performer and like that, the kind of existential state you're in when you're performing. But then, and to have like, the worst I've had to deal with is like hecklers or something like that, and you have to figure out how you're gonna deal with them and not ruin the feeling of the show. But then to also like have that added dimension of also like, I have to imagine it makes you feel unsafe or more. I don't know. I can't put. I don't want to put emotions on you, but like I'm just trying to guess. It's
so unsafe because then you pull back and you're like, what exactly is what is the plan here? What happens? I jump into this crowd and I start swinging. Like I don't think there was venue security. I stopped the show and I sacrifice all of this work. Do I compromise my livelihood so that I can go after these, but then you reduce it, you distill it further again. You're like, I'm one woman. There's like these two big dudes. What am I going to do? Anyway, I don't know how we got here. I don't know how we got here because I gotta say, and I don't know if, I'd love for us to talk about this, is how has it been talking to people since this kind of watershed moment? Because it feels really uncomfortable to me to, and I asked if we could postpone this, because I don't believe now is the time to really be talking about myself, so have you experienced that with other guests?
I don't know. See, the thing that I come back to, especially like doing this show, or even like, Naomi and I, we do a comedy show, is that there's still people need a break. I can't watch police violence 24/7. I need a break from that. We need a break from like doing whatever kind of activism we're doing. I'm in DSA. I work. I do stuff with the Immigration Justice Committee. I can't do it 24/7. I gotta have space in my life for like meaningful conversations. I love your music. I've been a fan for a long time. I think it's important to talk about some stuff, even if I don't know about like shows, either podcasts or TV shows or something that are just like so far away from anything meaningful, how they feel about it. I don't know, but I think either as distraction for a little while or honestly, it's been a joy to be able to talk to people and not have to, for an hour. I'm not saying turn off, period, but I'm saying like for an hour you're allowed, you have to recharge somehow, and to have like a conversation with someone whose work you enjoy and would like other people to listen to if they haven't, and to provide some kind of context, I think, for it. Why not?
I appreciate that. Totally. Well, let's talk about more fun things then. I didn't mean to fucking bum us out.
No. It's also interesting. It's also interesting to talk about. I think it's worth, if there's one show where we can have like some kind of meta view of what we're doing, it's this show. When does making things, whether, you started out like making music originally or drawing or whatever, what is like a moment in your childhood where you're like, oh, this is meaningful to me, whatever it is, if it did start out with music or some other kind of creative act?
I think when I first heard Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, You Really Got a Hold on Me, I think 5 or 6, and I loved the oldies station. When I first heard that song, that was a moment where I can point at and say music is meaningful, because it created this emotion and it created this excitement and also this sense of awe and connection, just melodic connection and rhythmic connection. That's when that's probably the first thing I can point to wherein I felt an affinity for music. But I didn't start playing for so long. Whatever music I did learn, I had to teach myself. And so it was later on. It wasn't until I was 11 or 12 where I started picking up guitar, because up to that point that wasn't really on the radar. The music lessons or even pursuing hobbies, that wasn't really available. But I remember watching Oprah and pretending that, okay, just stay with me here. I would talk to myself in the mirror and pretend I wanted to be an actor and other things too when I was a kid. And I remember pretending I was older me on Oprah, talking about when I was young, pretending to be on Oprah, things like that. Or like I would watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and pretend I had a cameo on it.
I really do. Like the number of times I've imagined myself on it being interviewed talking about things is, I would say for myself, embarrassing, the number of times that I've fantasized.
But I think it's really interesting to how a kid's brain processes what it would mean to have a life in art or a career making things. That the first step, or one of the first steps, is you bounce to already being celebrated as such. That's how I approached it, and it was it was less about process, and it was more like, how am I going to, I guess I needed attention. I don't know. I was just lonely. No one talked to me. I just watched TV all day. So it was, I guess, being paid some attention.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't subscribe to any kind of blanket theory about why people make art, right? But at some level, if you want to make art in the public eye, there has to be something you're looking for. There's I don't know what it is. I mean, for me, I definitely know there's some kind of like void. I'm looking for connection. I think that's a big thing. Like when I write something, I'm looking for other people that also feel that same thing or think that same way, because my brain's kind of weird, and I'm like, where are the other people that think weird, like in a weird way?
Yeah, I agree. I always, from very early on, wanted to just capture an emotion and present it to see if anyone recognized it.
Well, I mean, when did you start getting, is it like when you make your first album? Is it when you start performing? When you start getting the thing back that you were looking for?
Man. That is the rub, isn't it? Because if you don't do it in a healthy way, nothing is ever enough. And I have the difficulties I've had in my career and the challenges that I have presented myself, they have a lot to do with what is it that's going to matter? Because the things that you're chasing, the things you think are going to make you feel full, no matter what, as soon as it happens, it's the next thing. Your eyes are set on something else. And it's so you're just courting this infinite misery and pain and this self-loathing that comes from chasing a thing that even if you got it, you wouldn't recognize it. So what the fuck are you doing? And I'll say that it doesn't exist out there, and I think we all know that, but it takes a really long time to learn it on your own. And I can say that I only have felt like a full person because I started living my own life outside of music and outside of my career and outside the pursuit of public opinion, or like I fell in love, I got married, we have a house. Like the thing that makes me feel like a person is living as a full person.
Yeah. It took me a long time to realize that once I started doing this as a career, that I had to start separating the things I wanted to make, the things that fulfilled me. Like, I love the act of making things still, but that's now a separate thing from the stuff that like buys cat food or whatever, right? And I've had to learn, be like, oh, the career part is never going to be fulfilling. I'm always going, when I get the one thing, I'm now going to want the next thing, and I'm going to be bitter and angry that I didn't get the next thing already. Right. And so I have to not wall it off, because I'm in therapy. I have to learn to in a healthy way deal with those emotions. Totally. And then find fulfillment in my wife and my cats and dog and right. our friends and
or the things that you make because you wanted to make them and you made them. Yes. And that it's so. And I think. Also, what I've tried to do, have a hard time. Also, my therapist's advice, of course, to actually enjoy and celebrate moments when you do accomplish something.
Yes.
But it's so hard to stay in that moment. And I don't know how effective it was, but at shows I would try to just stay present enough so that if there, in the applause, I would acknowledge that there was applause, that I would be like, oh, the people, but it's it's hard to not, it's so hard to be there when you're only thinking about the things that you should have done better or you're thinking this applause is not enthusiastic enough, whatever it is, you're like, why is there not more screaming? I don't know. You can find, so it's an endless supply of things to make you feel bad, and it comes from you.
Oh my God. This is kind of talking to myself in some way in terms of like, yeah. We're almost towards the end. There's something I'm curious about. You can tell me if it just doesn't affect you in any way. I was thinking a lot about like how the way I was growing up, the Holocaust was pretty much this kind of like ground zero state for who the Jewish people were and who I was, and it in a very deep way has formed me as a person. And I'm curious if in some way the Vietnam War is it's even close. It's even closer to when you were born than, you know, the Holocaust was for me. But like, I wonder if that in some way shapes you.
I think it does. I think only in this last record and writing it have I given it more time and space and really considered what it has meant to me and my family. Because part of the progress of the family, part of dealing with losing your country and losing everything in a war is moving forward. And I don't believe that forward momentum allows for further consideration. And growing up, no one talked about, my parents never talked about the war. They talked about their lives before it. And then other relatives, as they were able to immigrate over, they would talk about what happened after the war, living under communism, before my mom was able to sponsor them over. But there was, there's just deep untouched sorrow, but then there's the ability to be very present and joyful in the moment because they have all experience.
Yeah.
All they can do, how do I say? They have so much experience in finding joy in wherever it is possible in utter loss, because I don't know other people who have experienced that kind of loss. So it gives you the scope of it. I don't know exactly how it's helped shape me, but it has. Everything just feels so innate and intrinsic because there's so little discussion around it that it's everything feels like it's that I was just born like this, you know.
Yeah. It's kind of, I mean, there's like what do you call it? Like a lacuna? Is that a absent space or something like that? It kind of like feels like that then in your history. I got a not a sanitized version of the Holocaust, but like a very American version. You don't learn that like until you are adult that like, oh yeah, Hitler got his ideas from America. I think there is a parallel in the sense that like both of us grew up in a country where in some way for me and in a very direct way for you, it was the architect of this destruction of our pasts in some way. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it's taken a lot for me to tease out or create separation from the narrative that I grew up with, which was that America saved South Vietnam. And that's, probably the Vietnamese diaspora, the Vietnamese community in America does skew, it seems to me, and in previous readings, it skews Republican, skews conservative. You have the elements of Catholicism, and then you have that anti-communist strain. So that's been a lifelong journey to educate myself with the resources available. And also language is such an interesting, it's been such an interesting beast in my life because I speak conversational Vietnamese. I'm fluent in conversational Vietnamese. I only speak what I was raised with, but if what you're raised with is conversational, it's about food, it's about, are you hungry? I don't have the tools in Vietnamese to express complex thought or emotion, and I can't communicate at that level.
Mm.
And what does that mean? It just means that there's a way that you cannot know a lot of your family. Basically, I can only communicate with my brother like this, if we chose to do that.
Right.
But with relatives, with my mom even, there's always going to be such a barrier because she's never going to have the English and I'm never going to have the Vietnamese. So that's why everything, it kind of floats on this deep love and dedication and loyalty, but it goes under-examined.
Yeah, it's like a dialectic between that deep love and a kind of like isolation or a othering or something like a deprivation of that. Like you're always like ping-ponging back and forth between those two ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. And it contributes, yeah. And it contributes to
I shrugged. I'm like, I guess.
Right. It does contribute to a loneliness, but then there's also such a beauty in not having to talk about everything.
Oh, you know? Oh, that's great.
And you can just rely on the fact that, in Temple, which is the lead single from our album Temple, I have a line that says, we don't have words for the way you have grown. We'll always feed you. You can always come home. And that's to me, I'm talking, it's written in my mom's voice, but it's about my life. It's about being married to a woman. Maybe they can't quite, but they're like, hey, we're going to feed you. And that's basically all you need to know.
Thao, that seems like a really nice place to end. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
It was a joy to talk to you. So thank you again, and we'll see you guys next time.
All right, take care. Bye, Andy. Thank you.
Bye, oh, 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 bye. Bye, bye.